September 23, 18. Arthur Mira. An analysis of President Jefferson's decision to purchase Louisiana from France. Bolstered by their historic victory against the formidable British military in the American Revolution, which was punctuated by the Declaration of Independence on July 4 of 1776, lively American settlers began to venture westward from the original 13 colonies clustered along the Atlantic coast. Louisiana Purchase, 2018. Propelled by a spirit of opportunity, independence, and adventure, newly minted Americans were willing to risk life and limb to make lives for themselves and their families beyond the western horizon. In fewer than 20 years after the conclusion of the Revolutionary War, determined American settlers had pushed westward across the immense Appalachian Mountains, through the vast Ohio River Valley, all the way to the banks of the mighty Mississippi River. With its countless tributaries intersecting it from British-controlled Canada all the way to the Gulf of Mexico, and rich resources along the way such as fur, tobacco, wheat, timber, and cotton, the possibilities for commerce and naval superiority offered by the Mississippi River were only bounded by one's imagination. It was clear to any world leader that whomever controlled the Mississippi Valley, and specifically the port of New Orleans at the southern tip of the Louisiana Territory, would be the dominant force in the central and western regions of North America. President Thomas Jefferson, 1743–1826, wrote to Robert Livingston the following words in April of 1802, revealing his acute awareness of the importance of the port city of New Orleans. There is on the globe one single spot, the possessor of which is our natural and habitual enemy. It is New Orleans, through which the produce of 3/8 of our territory must pass to market. Kukla, 2003, par 4356. Across the continent, looking eastward from the Pacific, the Viceroyalty of New Spain had expanded east across much of Central and North America and presented an ambiguous but inevitable western boundary that would eventually need to be confronted by the Americans. New Spain, 2018. As the original drafter of the Declaration of Independence and elected the third commander-in-chief of the fledgling United States of America, Thomas Jefferson faced the responsibility of resolving the question of who would control the Mississippi Valley. In historical hindsight, the resolution of this question involved much more than anyone in America at the time could have conceived of. Much of the credit for this momentous decision is attributed to Jefferson in his masterful negotiation via his emissaries, Robert Livingston and James Monroe, with the French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte, resulting in what we know today as the Louisiana Purchase. It is this history-altering decision by Jefferson to purchase Louisiana from the French that will be studied and analyzed herein. A complicated and dynamic set of world geopolitical forces were the backdrop against which the Louisiana Purchase was negotiated. The Spanish, British, and French empires, with differing but often overlapping imperialistic goals, were the major world powers that America and Thomas Jefferson were forced to contend with in the Western Hemisphere, and each had their sights set on the Mississippi Valley and New Orleans. Spanish King Carlos III, 1716–1788, and to a lesser degree his successor Carlos IV, 1748–1819, saw controlling the Mississippi Valley as their best hope for stopping the spread of American colonization west of the Mississippi and ultimately protecting their substantial mineral interests in Mexico and Peru. Kukla, 2003, par 638. Meanwhile, France, cum Napoleon Bonaparte, saw control of the Mississippi Valley as being strategically advantageous for a multiplicity of reasons best described by Kukla as follows. First, the produce of the Mississippi Valley could support French sugar, coffee, and cocoa plantations in the West Indies. Second, French possession of Louisiana would realign the balance of power in North America to the detriment of Great Britain and as a brake on American ambitions. Third, and the incentive for Spain's agreement, France could do a better job of defending Louisiana from the United States or Great Britain than could Spain. Kukla, 2003, par 4316. To the British, gaining control over the Mississippi Valley would constitute a North American rampart from which they could enjoy a strategic advantage in their impending war against France. The fear of British acquisition of the Mississippi Valley was one of the factors that accelerated Napoleon's decision to relinquish possession of Louisiana to the Americans. Kukla, 2003, par 5169. On the American side of the purchase, it's clear from historical documentation that the scope of Jefferson's strategic pursuit of the Mississippi Valley on behalf of the United States was diminutive compared to the final breadth of the Louisiana Purchase. Seemingly providential factors beyond his understanding or control were at play, which resulted in a grander and more historically pivotal land deal than observers at that time in history could have anticipated. While Jefferson's original charter for his diplomatic representatives to France was limited only to the purchase of New Orleans and the Floridas, Kukla, 2003, par 5286, the final deal resulted in the United States essentially doubling the size of its territory in a single diplomatic stroke, from which the entirety of modern Arkansas, Iowa, Louisiana, Missouri, Nebraska, Oklahoma, North Dakota, and South Dakota, as well as majority portions of Colorado, Kansas, Minnesota, Montana, and Wyoming, were carved. Britannica, 2018. One lesson that can be gleaned from this is that the total impact and future ramifications of major decisions are often not apparent at the time they are being contemplated. In this case, analyzing Jefferson's decision to pursue the purchase of New Orleans and the Floridas can produce a sense that elements of fate and/or destiny were at play. Not only did the scope and benefits of the deal expand unexpectedly, but other major unplanned events took place that seemed to set an irreducibly complex stage for the Louisiana Purchase that hinted at divine providence. Examples include a destructive hailstorm of biblical proportions in France, the fallout from which set up the conditions for the bloody French Revolution, Kukla, 2003, Para 2786, out of which Napoleon emerged as a formidable despot. The French Revolution also had reverberating effects along the Mississippi Valley, which was peopled by many French loyalists sympathetic to the revolutionary goals, ultimately diminishing Spain's grip on the Mississippi Valley and strengthening France's position to acquire it. These forces contributed to the eventual retrocession of Louisiana by Spain back to France shortly before the Louisiana Purchase, which turned out to be a golden ticket for Napoleon to sell to America in order to finance his wars in Europe. God's Providence, 2016. Just what can a modern decision-maker learn from these events, and how can they be applied to oneself today? It's hard to say, however. I would offer that history suggests that humble appeals to divine guidance are worthy of consideration when making important decisions. This principle is echoed in the words of President Abraham Lincoln's 1863 speech, in which he stated, "The year that is drawing towards its close has been filled with the blessings of fruitful fields and healthful skies. To these bounties, which are so constantly enjoyed that we are prone to forget the source from which they come, others have been added, which are of so extraordinary a nature, that they cannot fail to penetrate and soften even the heart which is habitually insensible to the ever-watchful providence emphasis added of Almighty God." Stanley Becker, 2018. Other cases in point include when President Grover Cleveland said in his 1885 inaugural address, "And let us not trust to human effort alone, but humbly acknowledging the power and goodness of Almighty God, who presides over the destiny emphasis added of nations, and who has at all times been revealed in our country's history, let us invoke his aid and his blessings upon our labors." Inaugural Addresses, 2018. And when President Obama in his 2009 inaugural address said, "This is the price and the promise of citizenship. This is the source of our confidence, the knowledge that God calls on us to shape an uncertain destiny emphasis added. This is the meaning of our liberty and our creed." Weisman, 2011. Regardless of the extent to which divine providence played a role in the Louisiana Purchase, there were both discernible risks and opportunities to be carefully weighed by Jefferson leading up to his crucial decision to make a play for complete control of the Mississippi and its associated profits. Without the benefit of hindsight, Jefferson had to weigh the risk of expanding the boundaries of the country beyond its capability to effectively unite and govern its far-flung inhabitants. Kukla put it succinctly, "With nods to the great Montesquieu and the experience of all ages, James Monroe's neighbor and law partner, John Dawson, proclaimed that no government, formed on the principles of freedom, can pervade all North America. The very idea of a single republic 1,000 miles in length, and 800 in breadth, and containing 6 millions of white inhabitants all reduced to the same standard of morals, of habits, and of laws," wrote the former librarian of Harvard College, James Winthrop, in the Massachusetts Gazette, "is in itself an absurdity, and contrary to the whole experience of mankind." Kukla, 2003, Para 1813. Also among the risks undoubtedly contemplated by Jefferson was that of Great Britain re-emerging as an opposing power on the continent. Jefferson feared that Spain's weakness in the Mississippi Valley encouraged British expansion from Canada. The British still held forts around the Great Lakes, and British fur traders and merchants plied the rivers of North America with little regard for boundary lines in the forest. Kukla, 2003, Para 1813. Additionally, if Jefferson failed to act quickly enough, there was the risk of various American colonial groups who, growing impatient with the economically crippling restrictions placed upon American commercial activity on the Mississippi by Spain, would attempt to take New Orleans by expeditionary force, resulting in unpredictable geopolitical ramifications. Kukla, 2003, Para 3167. On the opportunity side of the ledger, Jefferson was lured by the prospect of American adventurism and expansion into the vast Louisiana Territory and beyond to the Pacific Ocean, going so far as to endorse an exploratory scientific expedition, with ulterior geopolitical objectives, across North America by French botanist André Michaux, which would be followed by the famed Lewis and Clark expedition only a decade after. Weighing the extant risks and benefits in the balance, in light of France's perceived position of weakness stemming from their failure to dominate trade in the Caribbean, their vulnerability to British naval superiority, and the expected cost of their impending military conflagration with Great Britain, Jefferson struck while the iron was hot. He ultimately prevailed, emerging victorious by doubling the size of the country for the cost of mere pennies per acre. Louisiana Purchase, 2018, helping to set the stage for the meteoric rise of American dominance in North America and around the world. One valuable nugget that students of this fascinating slice of history can glean from Jefferson's arguably masterful handling of the Louisiana Purchase is that great accomplishments often consist of more than simply shrewd political calculation. Rather, they often depend on the coincidental alignment of existential events in combination with astute political calculation and perhaps a measure of divine providence. In the Louisiana Purchase, as in other of his endeavors as a statesman, Jefferson seemed to have an instinct for detecting and acting on just such fortuitous alignments. He seemed to operate above the noise of domestic unrest, which included not only the risk of the fragmentation of the states due to various separatists' movements, but severe criticism of his performance by his political opponents as well. This gets at the age-old question of whether good leaders are born or made, which is beyond the scope of this analysis but an interesting topic for further study. I will now turn to analyzing the mechanics of how the decision was made to acquire control of the Mississippi Valley. It's important to account for the historical setting of these events, which was devoid of today's high-speed transportation and communication means, and modern appurtenances that we today take for granted. Jefferson knew that written instructions, no matter how carefully composed, were cumbersome and chronically out of date by the time they crossed the Atlantic. Kukla, 2003, par 5332. Jefferson, being unable to communicate face-to-face with Napoleon due to vast geographical separation and the risks involved with overseas travel while sitting as president, negotiated by sending his diplomats on weeks-long Atlantic crossings to meet with Napoleon and his toadies. While the extreme communication latency, by today's standards, made real-time negotiations with the French dictator impossible, Jefferson maximized the use of the tools available to him at the time. He commissioned men who were the premier statesmen of his time and who were eminently qualified envoys, namely Livingston and Monroe, to deal with the most imposing of world leaders. To his carefully selected envoys, Jefferson delegated broad authority to engage in intense negotiations that would result in a binding treaty to secure American interests in the Mississippi Valley. Kukla, 2003, par 3167. History looks very favorably on Livingston and Monroe's performance in negotiating the Louisiana Purchase. What stands out in analyzing this aspect of Jefferson's decision is his exquisite ability to assemble the right mix of talent, skill, qualification, and personality upon whom to delegate measures of power to achieve great outcomes. Effective leaders that I have encountered and studied seem to excel in this area. They seem to realize that they cannot do everything alone, nor does micromanaging their subordinates produce desirable outcomes. Rather, they are able to wisely delegate power to subordinates while sensibly managing their performance and ultimately taking responsibility for the final outcomes of their efforts. Regarding the costs involved in the transaction, the Louisiana Purchase has gone down in history as one of the biggest land bargains ever recorded. Kepper, 2018. In fact, it's difficult to fathom the scale of the territory acquired in the Louisiana Purchase. The total area acquired was approximately 800,000 square miles, or roughly 512 million acres, at a total cost of $15 million, Kepper, 2018, which averages out to only 29.29 cents per acre. It's hard to imagine there being much of a struggle with the decision to spend what seems like such a relatively meager amount of money for such a vast swath of extremely valuable land. Put into historical context, however, it may not have been as much of a no-brainer as it would seem today when accounting for things like inflation, the fact that the land was largely unexplored, the risk that the land was too vast for the fledgling America to effectively govern, and the conservative manner in which America was forced to spend money in the early years of the country's history. Kukla points out that, still, $15 million was a lot of money at the beginning of the 19th century, especially to strict constructionist Jeffersonians paying off the national debt that Alexander Hamilton had created to strengthen the central government. Kukla, 2003, par 6756. What is clear from the historical accounts of the negotiation was that Livingston and Monroe had the temperament and skill to convince Napoleon and his representatives that selling New Orleans and the Floridas was in France's best interest. While they began to sense that Napoleon wanted to divest himself of not only New Orleans but the whole of Louisiana, Livingston and Monroe played down the importance of buying more land than they had originally came to bargain for. Livingston pled poverty and found fault with the merchandise the entirety of Louisiana. Because the United States would be perfectly satisfied with New Orleans and the Floridas and had no disposition to extend across the river, he told the French Treasury Minister, "Of course we would not give any great sum for the purchase." Kukla, 2003, par 5573. This strategy likely influenced the Frenchmen to settle for less money than they otherwise would have. I think these accounts of how masterfully the negotiations were handled, which turned out to be a windfall for Americans, highlight to the modern decision-maker how important it can be to have skilled negotiators on your side when taking calculated risks involving large investments. While President Jefferson's vision was key to the original pursuit of this strategic land purchase, it was ultimately the cunning performance of his appointed messengers that forged the details of the transaction and secured the extraordinary bargain for America. Another facet of this decision that bears examination is the elements of deception that were involved in how they played into the outcome of the transaction. Of note, during most of the negotiations, Napoleon was hiding the fact that he had recently reacquired Louisiana from Spain, in an attempt to keep his cards close to the vest. Talleyrand, Napoleon's aide, tried to keep the American minister at arm's length with trifling ploys, pretending all the while that France had no claim to Louisiana. Kukla, 2003, par 4822. This strategy, Napoleon calculated, would prevent opportunistic battle-hardened Americans from rushing in and grabbing New Orleans from her outgoing Spanish custodians before France could take it over and establish sufficient security to defend it from attack. This goes to show that in negotiations, perhaps especially with despotic autocratic leaders, things may not always be what they seem, and it's advisable to take statements with a measure of skepticism. Also, investing in intelligence gathering to independently verify key information is important. In this case, despite Napoleon's attempt at deception, Jefferson had already found out about the retrocession of Louisiana by means of effective intelligence gathering prior to commencing negotiations with France. Examining Jefferson's decision-making process in the Louisiana Purchase has been hugely instructive with many valuable lessons to be gleaned as I have outlined herein. There is much to learn by studying how Jefferson navigated the political and diplomatic minefields at home and abroad, stood up to withering criticism from political rivals, maintained poise when outcomes were uncertain, took calculated risks, appealed to divine authority for guidance, recognized and utilized the skill of others, made effective use of intelligence, and much more. With this analysis, I have come away with the impression that I have only scratched the surface of the treasure trove of insight contained in the historical accounts of the Louisiana Purchase, and it has opened my eyes to many important elements to critical decision-making that I hadn't before considered. I hope to carry these lessons into my own decision-making processes. Reference list. Britannica, T.E., 2018, October 26. Louisiana Purchase. Retrieved from https://www.britannica.com/event/Louisiana-Purchase. God's Providence, The Barbary Pirates, Manifest Destiny, and the Louisiana Purchase. Pamela Adams. The U.S. Constitution. Constitution.com. 2016, December 29. Retrieved from https://constitution.com/gods-Barbary-Pirates-Manifest-Destiny-Louisiana-Purchase. Inaugural Addresses of the Presidents of the United States, from George Washington 1789 to George Bush 1989. N.D. Retrieved from http://avalon.law.edu/19th_century/cleve1.asp. Kepper, Justin. 3 of the biggest land deals in history. Investopia, October 19, 2018, www.investopedia.com/financial-edge/1012/3-of-the most-lucrative-land-deals-in-history.aspx. Kupla, John. A Wilderness So Immense, The Louisiana Purchase and the Destiny of America, Kindle location 4844. Knopf Doubleday Publishing Group. Kindle edition. Louisiana Purchase. Wikipedia, Wikimedia Foundation, November 26, 2018, en.wikipedia.org/wiki/Louisiana_purchase. New Spain. Wikipedia, Wikimedia Foundation, November 28, 2018, en.wikipedia.org/wiki/new_Spain. Stanley Becker, I, 2018, November 20. We celebrate Thanksgiving because of this poignant proclamation from Abraham Lincoln. Retrieved from https://www.washingtonpost.com/nation/2018/1/2/we-celebrate-thanksgiving-because-this-poignant proclamation-Abraham-Lincoln/?question-UTM_term=sign.f8835D7EB01. Weismann, J. 2011, May 25. Obama, Aristotle, and Fred Astaire. Retrieved from https://www.huffingtonpost.com/jerry-weismann/Obama-Aristotle-N-Fred_B_1613548html.